Liberia, where you would have a better opportunity of establishing a base free from constant day-to-day harassments. That's a whole long story, and that didn't succeed for a variety of reasons. And so eventually it was the power of state, especially the power of government in this country, eventually, that was able to put Garvey in jail and deport him and break the back of his organization. The power of government, that was the only power left which was able to thwart Garvey's ambitions. The power of government. No other rival organizations were able to do what Garvey eventually suffered from the hands of the US government and other governments. So Garvey built his organization on a very definite ideological principle, the principle of African nationalism, or black nationalism, what Garvey called race first. Garvey's movement was a movement which was helped by a variety of different attributes. It was helped by Garvey's own personality. He was a man with great charisma. It was helped by his organizational genius. It was helped by his hard work. It was helped by his singleness of purpose. But the one common basic chord which ran through everything else was Garvey's ideology, philosophy. Garvey built his organization on a definite philosophy which he infused in his followers, the philosophy of race first, or African nationalism. As you know, for the whole of the history of this country, of African people in this country, there has been a contest, if you like, between two rival ideologies. On the one hand, there has been the ideology of integrationism, by which people believe that they can enter the mainstream on an individual basis, lose themselves in the mainstream, and everything will be okay. There has been the rival philosophy of black or African nationalism, which has said that we must build ourselves as a group, that we must build group strength. It doesn't mean that we can't deal with anyone else, but we have to deal with the rest of the world from a position of group strength. Garvey was one of the greatest proponents of the idea of African nationalism, group strength. He wasn't the first, but he was one of the greatest. He broke it down in a way that you can understand. Now, what did race first or African nationalism mean for Marcus Garvey? It meant a variety of things. It meant, first of all, that it was a measure, a defensive measure, a measure of defending ourselves as a group. As Garvey once said, quote, "In a world of wolves," he said, "one should go armed." And one of the best defensive measures in the hands of black people the world over, he said, was the practice of race first in all parts of the world. Race first. What Garvey meant was that a race must become a political entity. We must organize on the basis of race. Garvey argued that it was on the basis of race that we were oppressed. Other people tried to argue that we were oppressed primarily on the basis of class. But Garvey said we were oppressed as a race. It doesn't matter how rich a black person gets, you may escape for a little bit, you may be able to hide for a little while, but sooner or later you'll be walking down the street and somebody will call you a nigger. They don't care how much money you have. If he's really unlucky, some policeman might give him a hard time, put him in jail. When they find out he has money, then they apologize, but so what? Garvey said we were oppressed, not as human beings, not as class, not as anything, but as a race. Garvey said that it wasn't rich white people who were lynching black people in the South. It was working class white people, poor white people. Those were the lynchers in the South, poor white people. So Garvey said that we had to organize. Race was what was the main reason for our oppression. We had to turn race into an instrument of strength. We had to organize our race. We had to first uplift our race up to the level of everybody else. Then, if anybody wanted to talk about class or anything else, well, they would have the luxury at that point of talking about everything else. But the primary responsibility we had, the primary obligation, was to try to raise ourselves as a race. It was race which was the basis of our oppression. Race first. Race first meant a variety of things. It meant, first of all, that we would have to discard the propaganda of other groups which tried to put us on the defensive about our racial characteristics. Garvey was one of the first who put forward the idea of the black standard of beauty. But we didn't have to apologize to anybody else or spend great deals of money trying to look like anybody else. We had to be satisfied with what God gave us. God had a reason to make us. the reason why Garvey went so far as to manufacture black dolls for children to play with. Garvey thought of almost everything. Black dolls for children. Can you imagine what it does to a young child? Give a 2-year-old child a white doll to play with. What are you telling that child about music from a very early age? You're indoctrinating that child. Garvey realized you couldn't only talk about things, but you had to have alternatives. You couldn't tell folks to go buy white dolls if there were no black dolls available. So he manufactured black dolls. Garvey printed photographs of beautiful black women in his newspapers, so that when he told the black men to take down the white pinups from the walls, there would be some alternative for them to put up instead. Garvey talked about the question of miscegenation, race mixture. Garvey was aware of the fact that during slavery, we had all been mixed up through no fault of our own. Now, many people argue that Garvey was against light-skinned people, but this wasn't true. Garvey said, we have no control now over what happened during slavery. What Garvey did say was that there was no reason to continue that particular practice because we had control. Garvey was willing to accept anybody. Garvey once said he was willing to accept anybody from, with 1/32 black blood and up, as long as they identified with the race. That was a crucial element. As long as they didn't think that light skin gave them some kind of privilege, as long as they were willing to accept themselves as Africans, Garvey had no problem. I have here a little quotation from Garvey, something called What We Believe. And maybe this will give you an idea of the kind of ideas Garvey put forward along these lines of race first. What we believe, quote, the Universal Negro Improvement Association advocates the unity and blending of all Negroes into one strong, healthy race. It is against miscegenation and race suicide. It believes that the Negro race is as good as any other, and therefore should be as proud of itself as others are. It believes in the purity of the Negro race and the purity of the white race. It is against rich blacks marrying poor whites. It is against rich or poor whites taking advantage of Negro women. It believes in the spiritual fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man. That was a kind of a summary of some aspects of the race first doctrine as preached by Marcus Garvey. But race first meant much more than just the question of standards of beauty and being satisfied with one's physical attributes. It meant that we as a race had to look after our self-interest in practically every area of life. Race, like I said, for Garvey became a political entity. Whether one was talking about history, or literature, or religion, or art, or whatever. We were the ones who had to interpret our own reality. We had to be the ones to decide what was good for us, what was bad for us, what our history book should say, who our heroes should be, who our villains should be. And one of the great evils which has been perpetrated against us over the years has been that desire, somewhat effective desire on the part of the dominant race to tell us how we should think, who we should love, and who we should hate. And the result is, unfortunately, that very often we find ourselves hating those who we should love and loving those who we should hate. Marcus Garvey himself is a case in point. Here's Marcus Garvey, one of our greatest heroes. And for years, if you ask the average black person in the street who was Marcus Garvey, they would say, oh, he was a crook, stole the people's money, bought a few oil ships. That was the kind of impression you had of Marcus Garvey. Why? Simply because we were not in control of interpreting our own reality. Garvey once wrote a famous essay, which he called African Fundamentalism. And in that essay, he said, you'll find it in the back of the Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. And he said, the time has come, he said, for us to cast aside our hero worship of other races, he said. He said, we were the ones who had to decide who our heroes were, who our martyrs were. That was the basic text of that essay. We had to decide for ourselves. Garvey looked at history, for example. Now, most of us, when we grew up, found little along the lines of black history in our school, elementary school and high school. But what little there was in this country, whenever you found a black person mentioned, chances are it might have been Christmas Atlas. It might have been George Washington Carver. It might have been